There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Faith Odom, Assistant Director on the Alumni Engagement and Inclusion Initiatives team within the Alumni House. Welcome to Admission Insights in our webinar series. With this series of virtual webinars, we seek to provide education on general topics related to the college application process. I want to take a minute to encourage you to stay present during this webinar and engage and ask questions as they may arise. We are joined today by Will Haley, who is an alumnus of the Master's of Education from the class of 2019, and then Erica Torres was an alumna from the class of 2022. Will is a senior assistant dean of admissions. I want to make sure I get it right, from the William & Mary Office of Undergraduate Admissions. He currently serves students who are homeschooled as well as students located in Maryland and North Carolina. Erica serves as an admissions counselor in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, and she currently services the North Central Loudoun County, Virginia, Alaska, California, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington. So tonight they will be our guides to navigating college interviews. I will now turn the webinar over to them.
Thank you, Faith, and thank you all for joining us. Like Faith said, I'm Will Haley, William & Mary grad, at least on the grad school side. I've been in a couple of different admissions offices in my career. I spent the last about 2 years here in the William & Mary undergraduate admission office, and part of my role in this office has been to co-coordinate our senior interview program alongside Erica.
Hi, everyone. Like Faith said, I'm Erica Torres. I'm an admission counselor here at William & Mary and a William & Mary alum. I have been in the office for about 2 years now as well. Like Will said, co-coordinate the program for interviews here. So very excited to be here with Will to talk a little bit about interviews really in general.
And we're lucky enough to have Erica, who was a former interviewer herself during her undergraduate experience. So she is the seasoned vet. I got called up to the show a couple of times as needed to conduct interviews, but she's certainly the expert there. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint for y'all. So I'll kind of start off with kind of the general idea behind interviews and a few general specifics, but Erica will kind of dive deeper into that kind of boots on the ground experience with a student interviewing. So tips for a successful college interview. So first, interviews can look a little bit different, and every school is certainly going to conduct these differently, have different philosophies for what makes a good interview. So a few different ways that this can be performed. The first is student-to-student interviews. That's what we do here in our office at William & Mary. All of our interviews are conducted by rising seniors at William & Mary for rising seniors in high school. Certainly plenty of colleges and universities are going to utilize groups of student leaders to conduct these interviews. I think that is certainly important to us in the way that we want to operate in this office, being students first. And I think that creates a really unique environment in that interview room. But certainly plenty of institutions are going to utilize alumni for their interviews, particularly because alumni are scattered throughout the country, gives us extra access for folks. I think so when I see alumni interviews, I think so much about the Gilmore Girls scene where Rory's in Westport, Connecticut, that kind of awkward interview. But most of the time they aren't awkward like that. Alumni do an incredible job of being engaged in the undergraduate admissions process and can be, off campus in a way and kind of do that bridging that connection between prospective students, the current office, and alumni, which is a really, really cool opportunity for folks that get to participate in alumni interviews. And then last, admission staff interviews. I think both, alumni interviews and interviews conducted by admission staff, we're probably going to see more of that on some mid-sized to smaller institutions that kind of have more bandwidth to add that as a part of their program offerings. And it certainly would be very common to have an admission staff person be the one conducting the interviews, and that might range for, and certainly in our office sometimes we have programs that do involve admission staff, and that can range from just admissions counselors up to deans of admission, and certainly it depends school to school how they operate, who's trained to do that, and what that looks like. So obviously a particularly unique circumstance when there are admissions staff providing the interviews, because they are the ones that are, of course, ultimately reading future applications and utilizing the interview as a part of that application review process. And that is kind of the key when it comes to these interviews, is that this is a supplemental piece to an ultimate application. And certainly there are going to be schools that, again, as we see here, the general admission versus scholarship interviews. A lot of this is going to be a general admission interview, an additional piece to a kind of holistic review process of an application to kind of add more context to, the transcript and letters of recommendation and essays, to add that extra bit of context and to be able to dive a little bit deeper into that individual prospective student. On the flip side, certainly plenty of schools are going to have particular merit-based scholarships that will be dependent on an interview. And then certainly that might be both an admission staff, that might be alumni, maybe less likely to be the student to student in that circumstance. But another kind of likely circumstance to see an interview as part of the process, and that might be individual interviews individual scholarships. It might just be a larger scholarship. William and Mary, our 1693 scholars, it's kind of our most prestigious scholarship that has an interview portion. A lot of schools will do that. So it'll be a big interview weekend for kind of their final, finalist for a big merit scholarship. So you definitely see that very commonly as well. So it could certainly be on the just general admission as part of that application, or specifically for students that have already been admitted that are looking for additional scholarship money. So I think the first piece of advice that we want to make sure that folks are taking into account is to do your research and get to know the college's mission, values. It's so clear when a student is in an interview process, how well do they actually know the institution that they're interviewing for. So definitely implore folks to explore the college's website, social media. If you haven't gotten a chance to be on campus at that point, do a virtual tour, just gathering information. And Erica and I were just training this year's crop of William and Mary interviewers, and use this as an example of an interview. What if you walk into that interview and that student is going on and on about how great the nursing program is and how much they want to do the nursing program? No, that's what they want to do. They can't wait to be a part of this nursing program, but we don't have a nursing program, right? Like, this is an important part of the interview process, is to have this working knowledge of the university that you are interviewing with, and to present yourself as knowledgeable and as someone that is exceptionally interested in this institution. That is a huge piece of the interview, is not just what we are learning about a particular prospective student, but that this student is exceptionally interested in attending, looking for students that we think are likely to enroll if they are admitted. So I think learning those specific details about the college help tailor the responses to questions. It's particularly as for important admission related interviews, to show that it's not just that I am a great fit for a college, I'm a great fit for your college, and here's why. And I think that is a huge difference between just a run-of-the-mill interview and a very strong interview, is that prospective student that it can really dive deep into the details of the college and shows this great aptitude for what they really want, and why this college specifically, not just a college, but this college, and why they should admit them. So I think a big help is just to practice some common interview questions, and everyone's going to operate a little bit differently. Think, how it looks, whether it's a student conducting it or an alum or an admission staff. I know with the student to student, certainly it's probably going to be a few more like personality questions and things that have a harder time maybe preparing for. But there's no reason not to kind of prep some answers for some things that you expect to see. So obviously practice makes perfect. Obviously, you don't have to be perfect, but there's some things that you can expect to see in interview. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to attend this college? Something that you can expect to see in this interview, easy to start practicing that and started to thinking through that. And also, for that matter, a good exercise, for a prospective student to start thinking critically about the college process and that college in particular. I think this is a great way to get those wheels turning, to think critically about, themselves and their fit and what they're looking for as you kind of go through that process of practicing some questions and your answers to them. Obviously, you want to be yourself, not act like you are, or not present as you are having these memorized answers word for word. And certainly, and Erica can speak to this as someone that interviewed a lot of students, that there are a lot of times where you have a student that has clearly been practicing this. They are ready for the answer. That very politician, like, I know what I'm going to answer. It doesn't matter what the question is. And that's not what, we're going to be looking for. We want to get the full self of a student. And so that is certainly the key, which, will not be the first time that we mention this, but obviously to be yourself. But no reason not to kind of practice the pieces that are going to come, and just that general, the greeting, the ending, some just pieces that are really easy to practice and to come up with some answers for, not necessarily stock answers, but to be as prepared as possible. And there's no reason not to practice that.
Yeah, like Will said, the point of these interviews are really to get to know you a little bit better and add a little bit more of that personality to your application. There are no right or wrong answers. There's nothing in particular that we're looking for. It's really to get to know you a little bit more. I think the hardest thing to gauge in an application is that personality and what your passions are and your interests. And an interview can be a really good way to understand that a little bit better. And even though there aren't no wrong answers, I think important things to highlight in an interview can be academic achievements, your extracurricular involvements, personal accomplishments. I know here, those are 3 things that we are particularly looking at, and a lot of colleges, including us, will kind of prompt those types of questions during that interview. And of course, weaving in leadership experience, personal growth, really kind of putting your best foot forward during these interviews and highlighting the best parts of yourself, but at the same time, really talking about what ultimately interests you and really emphasizing that, like, we really just want to get to know you and what you are interested in, with no right or wrong answer being there. In terms of any big tips and tricks, additional things we want to add on, of course, dressing appropriately. We kind of emphasize how there's no particular way we want you to dress. Of course, keeping it professional, but we want you to wear what reflects you. So if you are a person that really likes to wear suits, come in a suit, like, if that's who you are. But if you're not, then that's totally fine. Kind of come as you are, keeping it professional, but not anything that's not really outside of your comfort zone. That's kind of what we tell our interviewers in the office as well. We want, you to look like you at the end of the day when you come and interview with us. Of course, avoid being a little too overly casual. I think this will vary from school to school exactly what they're looking for. But I think in general, not looking for anything, too crazy, but avoiding being a little casual. And then, of course, keeping good body language in mind, trying to maintain good eye contact. Offering a handshake, if that's also what you like. This is another thing we talked about with our interviewers this week. They were like, do we shake their hand when we go up to them? We're like, it's up to them, it's up to you, kind of read the vibe. If you're both into a handshake, then that's great. If not, that's totally fine. I think especially with COVID and like social distancing and such, like some people don't really like to do that anymore, and that's okay. I think really reading the room, but if that's something that you're comfortable doing, I think that's appropriate. But I think introducing yourself when you first meet that interviewer is, of course, really important. Keeping a good attitude, smiling, being enthusiastic, and trying to have good posture while you're sitting, I think can also be appropriate. Just keeping yourself engaged in that conversation, of course. I think that's really important during that process. As much as, you know, the interviewer is there and very excited to see you, you kind of want to reflect that upon them as well. And then something we also like to emphasize is how when you do an interview, this is not only us interviewing you, but also a good way for you to kind of interview the college and figure out if this would be a good space for you, if this is what you're looking for in a college. So I know with us in particular, we love doing the student on student interviews because you can really learn about that student experience through someone who is actively on campus right now and might have similar interests as you, or can just tell you about what life on campus is like. So definitely prepare your own questions. And I think that this is something as well, that there's no like particular questions that you have to be asking. We're not looking for you to ask something in particular. There's no right or wrong question. Like, I think this is genuinely just a good time for you to get to know the college a little bit better and kind of understand the vibe, and what you're looking for. But also a really good way to, of course, show your interest. So asking questions that do demonstrate interest, but interest in whatever you're really looking for during that process of searching for your college. I know some colleges do those interviews before you've applied, some do it after. So especially if those are before, it's a really good way to figure out if that could be a good space for you. You can, of course, talk about academics, organizations, campus culture. And I think, you know, if you're speaking to a current student, really good time, like I said, to talk about their experience currently, but alum are also great people. And if it's also an admission staff member, we'll also know a lot about what's going on campus through kind of our students that we speak with. So definitely feel free to ask any questions that you may have. And the last tip, which I know is so much easier said than done, don't be nervous. Like we said earlier, like this is not, there's no right or wrong answers for this. This is really to showcase yourself, no matter who you're interviewing with. So take some time to relax, calm your nerves before the interview. These are not as evaluative as you think. These, of course, will be reviewed with your application process. But the way that we were talking about this the other day, we all kind of explain it differently. But the way I like to explain it is that when we're reviewing an application, you're kind of throwing all these different things into a hat to be evaluated together. And so that interview is just another thing that's looked at in our holistic review. So it's not going to be like 70% of your evaluation or anything like that. So it's okay to be nervous. We completely understand if you are. And that's not going to take away from that conversation that you have, because it's really about the content of it all. And if you don't know the answer to something right away, that's totally fine. We don't know things all the time, and we very much will say, hey, like, let me get back to you on that. That's something you can also do in an interview. Take time to think about it. And really, you know, use this time once again to see if this college is a great fit for you, as well as we are interviewing you, you are interviewing us. Once again, don't forget to be yourself. Embrace the opportunity to showcase who you are. I cannot emphasize how much like that is really the point of these interviews, is to be who you are, for us to see that, and just give you the chance to talk more about yourself.
Absolutely. It's obviously such a cliche to say be yourself, but that's what this process is all about, whether it is for admission, whether it is for, additional scholarship. It's all about you. And for that interviewer, that alum, that admission staff member, that institution, it's just getting to know you. And particularly as we think about the admission process, if it is just kind of a general admission interview, like Erica said, it's just another piece to add. And I think William Mary's a school, I think we do a great job of, like, throughout the application process, like, multiple eyes are going on these apps and we spend a lot of time with them, but that's not always going to be the case. And that's still, one essay takes a minute to read, but a 30-minute interview gives you so much more context to a student. So it's all about just showcasing who you are, and yes, who you are in the context of that university and why you'd be the great fit for that school or that program or that scholarship. Absolutely. But you can only do that by showcasing yourself. Right. So what questions do y'all have? Obviously, we're both coordinating an interview program. Erica has conducted hundreds, I think, of interviews in her time with prospective students. Please use that Q&A feature, and I can actually just go ahead and stop sharing so you can see our faces big and bright on screen. But what questions do y'all have for us? While we wait for maybe a few questions to pop in, Erica, do you have any like I don't know, particular memorable like interview experiences, things that really popped for you as a positive interviewer?
Yeah, I think once again, not to emphasize this for the 1 millionth time, but I think the interviews I remember the most and that were my favorite were the ones where students just really talked about whatever it was that they were interested in. And of course, like, we go in with questions that we intend to ask, but I think it's really fun when I ask a question and then somebody just starts talking about something they're really into. And now we're just having this like 20-minute conversation about that one thing. And I think it's normal to kind of leave that and be like, ooh, I didn't talk about my extracurriculars and I didn't talk about this internship I did and this job I had and all this. But I think even then, those were my favorite interviews where I still got that perspective and really, I don't know, was able to learn about what that person was really interested in. And now that I'm on the other side of things as like an admission counselor, when I'm reading an application, I think it's really cool to like see what was talked about in an interview and then how that like fits within their larger application. So I think still relevant that those are my favorite, like the ones that are clearly kids just super passionate about whatever they're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you. So some questions came in. Awesome. Appreciate y'all. What's the best time in your high school career to do an interview? I think it just depends on what that school offers. For us, it's very important that it's just rising seniors. It's right before that they are submitting those applications. So we conduct ours throughout the summer, and we have some options in the fall as well. So in theory, they could apply after, or they could interview after having submitted an application. But for the most part, it is kind of right before they apply. A great opportunity for us to kind of convince some students to apply, or maybe convince them to do early decision as opposed to regular decision. But it depends school to school, right? So it depends on what they offer. I think that if there is no limit for that institution of when you can or can't interview, probably going into that senior year, kind of before that application process, is the best time. You have the most information to pull from, the most experience to talk about in the high school career, and at the same time you are getting up to that college decision process. So a great opportunity for the student as well to meet with, whether it's an admission staff or an alum or a student, kind of right as they're coming up to making that decision is probably as helpful as anything. Are thank you notes expected? I would say depends on the situation. I would say expected, probably not. But I think it also kind of depends on who you're interviewing with. So I know for us with student interviewers, I think it's a much different energy and expectation than if it's an alum. Maybe you are meeting them at their house and sitting down with them. Like that does feel like a time where I think a thank you note would be most appropriate. I wouldn't stress too much if it is an admission staff member or a student and it's just a thank you email. I think that is perfectly fine. I think that is more than covers it. But I think you play by ear. I would say the alumni might be the time where it would be nice to do a nice little handwritten note and send that to them. But particularly if it's student and it's admission staff that are just available via email regularly, I think that covers it. Erica, did you get a ton of thank you notes when you were an interviewer?
Not a ton. Occasionally I would get like a thank you email, but definitely not expected. Always nice to get one, particularly when you had a really good conversation. Someone's like, I love talking with you about this and this, but definitely not expected, but can be a really nice touch after an interview.
Absolutely. I don't think, and we're not necessarily like checking a box like,
No.
did they or did they not? But no reason not to at the same time, right? So student looking at schools that are a little bit larger, which of course like makes it a little bit tougher to work that interview process, might be more likely at a larger school that an interview is maybe a part of the scholarship process as opposed to part of the admission process. But I guess if they're offering or suggest to reach out to an alumni, not sure if that is a situation where they are necessarily looking at it like an interview, like hoping that students look out. I think that is probably more of a just general info. Here are some alumni available that can be a resource, maybe more than it is an interview. So I think and which is something we maybe should have mentioned before in this interview process. It might be the first time, a student's doing an interview, or, maybe they've got some part-time job or summer job that required some level of interview, but this is, a great opportunity just to get some practice in too, which I should definitely include. And my dad's a college counselor and a teacher in the area. He sends students our way constantly for interviews, even if they're not interested in William & Mary, just to get that experience in. And to do that, maybe they do have an admissions interview later on or a scholarship interview later on, which can be a great opportunity. Can an interview be negative addition to your application? For example, if you're really shy, maybe can't showcase yourself well. Erica, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So we always say an interview can't really hurt you. It can really only help you. With that being said, I think sometimes an interview isn't the best way to showcase your abilities, and I think that's okay. It's really up to you and your best discretion. I think especially if a college like us doesn't require an interview, it's really up to you whether you want to do it or not. But if you don't do well in that interview, I think typically, like we said earlier, like an interview only holds so much weight. So it won't be the one reason that you aren't admitted or something like that. The way we would like to kind of explain it is like on our end, it can be it can really only help. I think that if we're kind of teetering for whatever reasons, an interview can be helpful in kind of moving the discussion forward about an application, and kind of keeping you in the ballpark of things. But I think that it's really hard for it to be kind of the opposite way, where it's everything is good, but this interview wasn't great. And so we're not going to move forward with this or whatever the reason. I think especially if it's because you're a little shy, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Will, any other thoughts?
Yeah, no, right. I think, right. If an interview maybe isn't the best representation of you in that process, that's okay. If it's an optional interview, you don't need to do it.
Mhm.
But for us, and I think just in our admissions process, we do get to a point where we're making kind of final decisions as we finish up a class, and we will sit down with each other and, you know, talk about an application, throw it on the board and have that discussion. And there are certainly times where, you know, students are, you know, solid across the board, but nothing really stands out except that interview. That was a standout interview, and we're having that additional discussion because that interview was so strong. And then on the flip side, there's times where everything looks great, but, you know, the interview wasn't strong. Maybe there was a concern here or there, and it requires that follow-up discussion. I would say 9 times out of 10, the answer is, yeah, everything else is great though, and we have no concerns anywhere else in this application. It's totally fine. And we're going to move forward with that student for sure. That is way more likely the case than it to go the other way for sure. For us, we have started today interviewing folks. It was a very exciting day in the office. We have plenty of options, both in person and virtually, throughout the summer. We'll add some dates in the fall as well. We don't know what those will look like until the students have their schedule, but we still have plenty of dates throughout the summer if anybody's interested in a William and Mary specific interview. So both in person and virtual. So if you're around, awesome. If you can get to campus, awesome. If you cannot and need to do it over Zoom, totally fine. We got that as well for you. So making sure it's as accessible as possible.
I will shamelessly drop the link to register for William and Mary interviews in the chat in case anyone's interested.
So appropriate for students to explain unusual circumstances on their application. I think if this is particularly, you know, a small school, maybe a school that requires the interview, and that's probably more likely with an admissions staff member, or certainly, I think there's no reason not to, you know, again, right, this is about the context, and this is what's so great about a face-to-face interview, is that you can gain so much additional context that you don't get on a piece of paper or in the application. So I certainly think it's appropriate to dive deep. Obviously, you want to like keep it appropriate, and there are certainly some circumstances that can struggle. I think, you know, diving too deep into, you know, maybe tough experiences or things that just aren't a lot of fun to talk about can have definitely be the context for, you know, a grade drop. You don't need to dive too deep into the story of what's going on, but I think it's totally fine to say, you know what, I was struggling that semester, and I got it up, but I wanted to talk about why, you know, that happened. You're gonna see that grade up. You maybe already did see that grade drop, and I want to just kind of give you that additional context. I think that's totally appropriate. Let's see. So during the WM interview, does the interviewer take their own notes of the interviewee and include in the college application to be reviewed on later? That's exactly how we do it. Have the interviewers that take notes during the interview, right after the interview, do a little write-up, and then we as the admission staff can dive in at the end as we are reviewing the application, and we see that right there to have that little additional piece, which can be great. Sometimes there's things in there that we don't get to see on the application. Sometimes, you know, there's a question we see, oh, there's so much more here. Maybe it's just everything's great and the interview's great. This is incredible. What an awesome student. Admit, go try it. So definitely that is exactly kind of what our process looks like, is having that interviewers take their notes and then adding it to that evaluation to the application. And as we mentioned before, right, this is one piece of a holistic application review. So it is, you know, really can only help you, but it's also just one piece. You know, it's not going to overwrite the entirety of an application because it's just as important as those other pieces. And I will say, for us, for any school, like, you know, as much as we do tout the holistic application review, which we do, we take all of it into account. First things first, we are looking at the academics. Like, every school has to only admit students that can be academically successful at that institution. So that is like step one, and then everything else is kind of giving that extra context and kind of, you know, differentiating between students at William & Mary. It's a lot of really strong students. We have to look at all these other pieces to make those decisions, and an interview can be just an additional piece to help make that. Erica, what was our percentage of applicants that did an interview this past year? Do you remember?
Yeah, I believe about 20% of students who apply to William and Mary do an interview. And we very much understand that there is a limited number. So a lot of times, especially when people are interested in interviews in the fall, we don't have any spots available. So totally okay if you're not able to make one. And only 20% of students do. So it's totally okay if you're not able to or choose not to. So it's not a huge part or population of students who end up doing one.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you know, for us, like we only have so much time in the summer. We have so many slots. We don't have a slot for everybody. We couldn't make it required if we wanted to, because we just have that limited space of what our student schedules are. And that's only going to be, you know, more the case when it's just an admissions staff conducting interviews or only alumni that, you know, have agreed to be a part of it. So I think very small schools, maybe that is required, you know, part of the application process, but would be really hard to make that required or to view it negatively for someone to not do an interview when there's just only so much time and so many spots to do so. So the information shared about the student when they schedule an interview, or is all information about the student learned via the interview? Okay, yeah, good question. So I think, you know, for us, we're already to sign up for an interview, and I think most schools are going to have the same general process that, you know, you are putting in some personal information into there. So, you know, we're going to know where you're from, what your academic interests are, if you've, you know, selected those. But that's about it. You know, at this part of the process, it's just kind of those bare bones things. For us, because we've got 14 different students to choose from on a given day potentially, I do like to schedule someone maybe from the same state as the interviewer, maybe has similar academic interests that can make that connection, and knowing that there's going to be questions at the end of that interview can connect with. So having that little bit of information is helpful. But, you know, for the most part, if this is a pre-application, you know, process, then, you know, you're only going to have a little bit of info going in. Now, I will say, if this is, you know, a scholarship interview, this is late in the process, you know, this is being conducted by somebody that's maybe read the application or has, you know, knows a little bit about you, or you've already done an interview and you're in a final interview for this big, you know, merit-based scholarship. You know, important to recognize that as you go into that interview, that they already know some of this, and I don't need to maybe explain this part or that part because we're diving a little bit deeper now. But that is, you know, certainly just going to be, you know, where in that timeline that interview is, and also a good, which is something that we don't necessarily have in our presentation, unless they request it, certainly don't need like a resume to when you show up, particularly because if it's like a scholarship thing and they, you know, already have all that information, they have your application, they might ask you for one at that point, something to like obviously look in, do that research, and, you know, both what to wear, what to bring, like every school is going to definitely present that information, but something to check in on, but almost exclusively not going to need like a physical resume when you're there. Erica, how long are your interviews usually?
Yeah, so here at William and Mary, they're typically 20-25 minutes or so. So not super long, but I think a good amount of time to still dive into anything in particular you're interested in talking about. I think obviously, you know, this can vary from school to school. I think interviews could be up to an hour-ish, depending on the school, but for us, 20-25 minutes.
And I think, you know, right, depends on what it is. Like for an admissions interview, can only be so long. Maybe if it's an alumni interview, it's at the house. Maybe it's over lunch. Maybe that looks a little bit different. If it's for like that final round of a scholarship, maybe it's multiple interviews with different, you know, partners throughout an afternoon. So, you know, it just kind of depends on the situation. But usually you're not going to go dive super deep. And then lastly, Erica, any hot tips on being yourself during an interview?
Yeah, I know this might sound silly and this is something we say a lot, but like talk about yourself. I think sometimes, you know, it's easy to go on tangents and start talking about like, you know, your family and stuff. And that's of course great, especially if it's something that's very important to you, but make sure to always tie it back to yourself. I think also just keeping in mind that we really are looking for what makes you you. So if the question is like, what is your favorite class? You don't have to say that your favorite class is AP Physics because it's the hardest class you can think of and you're trying to like showcase that you can really handle a challenging class. Like if your favorite class was AP Art, like tell us it was AP Art and tell us what you love so much about it. That's really what we're looking for. I also think that the interviews are really good ways to highlight things that might not be in your application elsewhere or that are very kind of small blips that could be overlooked. And this is just a really good time for you to talk a little bit more about those things, especially if they're like a hobby or some volunteer work that you do or something like that. That is especially outside of academics. I think that's a good time to highlight those things as well. But really, I always say like in talking about like essays as well, like you don't have to be like doing rocket science or like solving like world hunger, like to have a good essay or to be a really good candidate. I think that as long as, you know, whatever it is that you're interested in is what you're about, like we read so many essays and have a lot of interviews, and sometimes people talk about the same things, but people won't talk about the same things in the same ways. And so there's really just no wrong answer when it comes to being who you are.
Bars. Where's some sample questions one might practice with ahead of time? I mean, I think any online resource with just a general interview, not necessarily like a college specific interview, which certainly might have some, you know, what do you want to study? What is your favorite class? What's your least favorite class, but you know, enjoy taking at the same time? Certainly might be some of that, but I think if you're, you know, kind of trying to practice ahead of time, just those general things, thinking critically about, you know, a strength of yours, or maybe think critically about a weakness of yours, you know, how to, particularly if, and I don't think this is a great question, but, you know, not every interviewer is, you know, classically trained in the interview arts like Erica is. If it just starts with telling about yourself, to know what you want to say when you get asked something, you know, in more a generality, like that. But I think any practice is really great to when you're just thinking on your feet and again trying to not just say an answer but an answer and why, you know. Then you think, what's my favorite class? Well, it's AP Art because and that very improv yes and approach, which is certainly going to be the most helpful thing for you in any interview, but particularly this. It's, you know, trying to get to the bottom of who you are and telling us about yourself. Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily, the specific question is maybe less important as the process, because you never know what you're going to get. And certainly when we're talking about high school students, I would imagine too, we talk about a lot of very serious questions. You know, what's your favorite class? What are your, you know, involvements? What do you like to do for fun? But there might be some funky ones. There might be, what kitchen appliance would you be? And I don't know if there's a great way to like practice that, but to maybe think about some of those more creative qualities for you to be prepared for some of those like personality questions that I think will definitely pop up. Maybe some places more than others, particularly if students are asking. I think you might get some off the wall ones, but to be prepared for that. And again, you know, the tell me about yourself. Yeah, Erica, what would you like to hear from a student if it was just a general tell me about yourself?
Yeah, I won't lie, I wouldn't ask that question, but if I were, I think just some general background, because especially like when you're coming in not knowing anything about the person you're about to interview, I think just like, you know, where you're from, like what brought you to this school, like what brought you to this interview, why are you interested in this, what you're generally interested in studying, and maybe why you're interested in that. I feel like that might be a question that comes up later. And then like maybe one or two interests, like pretty general, kind of keep it concise. But I think especially just like, why are you here with us? Why are you interviewing with this particular college? I think that's a good kind of way to open things up. Because I think that that's always something I'm curious to know when I'm like speaking to students, like, you know, what interests you about us? Is it like a major? Is it a particular like organization? Like your cousin went here, like, why are you, you know, here today?
Yeah. And that's definitely that's the start. That's the very beginning. They got some more questions later. No need to dive into things that, you expect to want to talk about. Tell me about yourself shouldn't end in a 5-minute answer. It should be real quick, like you said. Who am I? What am I doing here? So excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Like that is, but again, hopefully not getting a ton of that. But I don't know, somebody that's done a number of job interviews. Erica, I don't know if you did a number. You were probably hired right on the spot after graduating. But there's certainly you get a lot of that to start things out, and that's a tough one. That might be as tough as anything. It's like, well, what do you want me to highlight? But can be then a good one to prep a quick little like here's my elevator pitch, here's my quick bullets on me. Right. Any final questions before we wrap up? Making pretty good time. These are really great questions. I appreciate that. Well, and again, to shamelessly plug our own interview process for any rising seniors out there that are interested in William & Mary or just want to, get some reps in to do some interview practice. We have that on the chat, that link to sign up for an interview with us.
Go ahead, we'll give everybody maybe 1 more minute for any last minute questions. I don't want to cut anybody off while we have this designated time here. While we wait, I want to start by thanking you both so much. This has been a great webinar. It's been very insightful. I feel like I've learned a lot, and not that I plan on doing another college interview again in my life. Like it's been very helpful, and I know our alumni probably feel the same. Okay, well, I have put a link in the chat to all of our alumni admission. We have renamed our admission insights resources. The registration for upcoming webinars and the recording for past webinars can be found at that link on the William & Mary Alumni Association website. You can also find the registration for Admission Insights Weekend, which is happening the weekend of, I want to get my dates right, June 21st and 22nd. We will have on-campus resources for students to not only be able to do interviews, but also learn more about the college application process from different resources. We have alumni coming, admissions professionals from different universities, as well as different activities to continue to cultivate community like we do here at William & Mary. But that is it. That's all I have for today's session. So if there's any other questions or concerns, we will wrap it up for today. Thank you all for attending.